In the quiet, leafy suburbs of Melbourne, a massive mansion worth $80 million stands as a monument to a new kind of wealth. This is the home of Ed Craven, a young man who does not wear a suit or carry a briefcase to an office. Instead, he represents a generation that found a way to turn digital code into a $23 billion empire. The world of high-stakes gambling has shifted from neon lights to the silent glow of computer screens. Traditional casinos in Las Vegas and Macau are built on physical foundations of concrete, steel, and expensive carpets, designed to keep people inside. But the founders of Stake realized that the future of betting did not require a physical location or even a traditional bank. They envisioned a borderless world where cryptocurrency replaced cash and algorithms replaced the physical dealer. This shift would eventually allow them to process more transactions than almost any other gambling entity on the planet. Ed Craven and Bijan Tehrani do not look like the typical titans of the gambling industry who have controlled the market for decades. They are unassuming millennials who spent their youth playing video games and exploring the early corners of the internet. Yet, beneath their casual appearance lies a sharp, mathematical mind capable of identifying a massive gap in the global financial system. They understood that the digital generation wanted something faster, more private, and far more accessible. To understand the scale of their success, one must look at the staggering numbers that define their daily operations. Stake has processed over 65 billion bets since its inception, a figure that dwarfs the historical volume of many legendary casinos. Every second, thousands of digital wagers are placed by users from every corner of the globe. It is a relentless machine of probability that generates hundreds of millions of dollars in monthly revenue for the two founders. The secret to their rapid ascent was the seamless integration of blockchain technology with the ancient human desire to take a risk. While traditional casinos struggled with complex international banking regulations and slow wire transfers, Stake offered instant deposits and withdrawals through Bitcoin. This innovation removed the friction of the old world, allowing players to bet with a level of speed and anonymity never seen before. They turned the barrier of entry into a digital open door. The website itself is a masterclass in modern user interface design, focusing on a minimalist aesthetic that appeals to younger audiences. Unlike the cluttered and flashing banners of older gambling sites, Stake looks like a high-end trading platform or a social media feed. This design choice was intentional, making the act of gambling feel like a casual digital experience rather than a heavy financial decision. They successfully gamified the house edge for a new era. Marketing played a crucial role in turning a nerdy startup into a household name for millions of young people worldwide. They did not buy traditional television commercials or billboards in Times Square to reach their audience. Instead, they invaded the digital spaces where their target market lived, sponsoring massive influencers and streamers. By the time the world noticed, Stake was already the primary sponsor of a Formula One team and several major football clubs. Perhaps the most iconic symbol of their influence is their massive partnership with the global superstar Drake. The rapper regularly broadcasts himself betting millions of dollars on the platform to an audience of tens of millions. This high-profile endorsement transforms Stake from a niche crypto site into a cultural phenomenon associated with luxury and celebrity life. It was a marketing masterstroke that blurred the lines between entertainment, music, and high-stakes digital gambling. However, this astronomical growth did not come without intense scrutiny from governments and regulatory bodies across the world. Operating in the gray areas of international law, the founders navigated a complex web of licenses and geographic restrictions to keep their engine running. They were constantly moving, adapting, and finding new ways to stay one step ahead of the authorities. The story of Stake is a race between innovation and regulation in the digital age. As the valuation of the company reached $23 billion, the two millennials found themselves among the richest people on Earth. Their journey from playing RuneScape to owning one of the most profitable websites in history is a modern fable of tech-driven disruption. They proved that in the digital economy, a few lines of code and a bold vision could topple empires. But the question remained: how long could they maintain this high-wire act? The rise of Stake is not just a story about money. It is a story about the changing nature of trust and probability. In a world where everything is becoming decentralized, Craven and Tehrani bet that the house would always win, as long as the house was digital. They built a fortress of data and luck that changed the gambling industry forever. This chapter is only the beginning of a saga that spans continents, currencies, and controversy. Ed and Bijan were not typical business students found in elite universities or corporate boardrooms. They were obsessed with the digital world of RuneScape, a pixelated realm where they learned their first lessons about supply and demand. In this game, they realized that people were willing to spend real-world hours in currency to acquire rare digital gold. This was the fundamental spark that would eventually ignite their multi-billion-dollar empire several years later. While their peers were focused on traditional sports or schoolwork, these two were deep in the mechanics of online trading. They saw that digital platforms were essentially unregulated markets, where the cleverest players could accumulate massive wealth. This was not just a game for them. It was a laboratory for social engineering and economic theory. They began to understand how to manipulate digital scarcity to their own significant and growing financial advantage. The partnership between Ed Craven and Bijan Tehrani was built on a shared vision of the future internet and finance. Bijan provided the technical foresight, while Ed possessed a natural instinct for marketing and complex business operations. Together, they formed a duo that could bridge the gap between complicated software and consumer psychology. They were not looking for a corporate job. They were looking for a way to break the traditional banking system. In 2013, a revolutionary technology appeared on their radar that would change the course of their lives forever: Bitcoin. Most people at the time viewed it as a toy or a tool for criminals on the dark web. But for Ed and Bijan, it was the perfect medium for a global, borderless economy. It was digital gold that could be moved instantly across the planet without the permission of any centralized bank. They launched their first venture, Prime Dice, in a small apartment with very little capital but a lot of ambition. The concept was simple: a dice game where players could bet small amounts of Bitcoin on a single roll. It was minimalist, fast, and entirely digital, stripping away the flashing lights of a traditional casino. They introduced a feature called Provably Fair, allowing users to verify the randomness of every single result. This transparency was a radical departure from the opaque world of traditional gambling, where the house was often suspected of cheating. By showing the code, they built an unprecedented level of trust within the skeptical and growing cryptocurrency community. Users felt they were playing against a fair algorithm rather than a rigged machine in a dark room. This trust became the foundation upon which their massive future success would be built. Prime Dice became a viral sensation in the early crypto forums, processing millions of rolls as the price of Bitcoin surged. Ed and Bijan watched as their small project turned into a significant source of revenue and valuable user data. They were learning the habits of the digital gambler: what made them stay, what made them bet more, and what made them return. Every single bet was a data point in their grand master plan. The motive was never just about the money. It was about the thrill of building a system that was truly global. They saw that the old world of gambling was restricted by geography, local laws, and slow-moving government bureaucracy. By operating in the digital cloud, they could reach players in Australia, Europe, and Asia simultaneously. They were creating a new type of sovereign entity that existed entirely within the lines of a computer. As the profits from Prime Dice grew, the two millennials realized that they had outgrown the simple mechanics of a dice game. They wanted to build a full-scale digital casino that could compete with the giants of the industry on every level. They envisioned a platform that combined sports betting, classic casino games, and social interaction into a single, seamless experience. This ambition led to the birth of their most ambitious project, Stake. They were no longer just nerdy gamers. They were becoming the architects of a new financial reality for millions of people. The transition from pixelated gold in a video game to the real-time movement of billions of dollars was nearly complete. They had the technology, the trust of the crypto world, and a hunger that would soon disrupt the global gambling industry. The stage was set for the launch of a massive website. Their background as gamers gave them a unique advantage over the aging executives of traditional gambling corporations who did not understand internet culture. They knew how to create a sense of community and excitement that felt authentic to a generation raised on Twitch and Discord. They were not just selling a chance to win. They were selling a digital lifestyle of risk and reward. This cultural connection was their secret weapon against the giants. The transition from a simple dice game to a full-scale casino required a massive technological leap for the young team. Ed and Bijan understood that the old model of web gambling was cluttered, slow, and visually unappealing to their peers. They wanted a sleek, high-performance engine that felt like a Silicon Valley product rather than a dusty betting shop. This vision led to the birth of the Stake platform in late 2017. The true genius of Stake lay in its total embrace of the decentralized financial revolution happening across the internet. While traditional casinos spent millions on complex compliance and banking fees, Stake bypassed the traditional gatekeepers almost entirely. By accepting only cryptocurrency, they removed the need for traditional credit card processors who often blocked gambling transactions. They turned a regulatory hurdle into a massive and sustainable competitive advantage for their growing brand. The interface of Stake was designed to be as frictionless as possible for the modern digital user. They chose a dark and sophisticated color palette that suggested a high-end trading floor rather than a chaotic street carnival. There were no loud pop-up ads or distracting banners to pull the user away from the core experience of betting. Everything was streamlined to encourage continuous and rapid-fire interaction with the games on the platform. To keep millennials and Gen Z users engaged, the founders implemented social features that mimicked popular video games. A live chat box allowed players to celebrate their wins or lament their losses in real time with thousands of strangers. They introduced leveling hair thong and daily challenges that rewarded loyalty with digital prestige and small amounts of cryptocurrency. Gambling was no longer a lonely act. It became a global social event. They took the concept of transparency to a new level by making the house edge visible and verifiable for all. Every game outcome was generated by a seed system that players could check themselves to ensure no manipulation occurred. This radical honesty was a psychological masterstroke that converted skeptics into lifelong loyalists of the brand. It gave the illusion of control in a world governed entirely by cold mathematical probability. Instead of just hosting third-party slots, Stake developed their own proprietary games known as Stake Originals like Plinko and Mines. These games were visually simple but mathematically tuned to provide a high frequency of small, encouraging wins. This kept the dopamine flowing through the player's brain, while the house slowly and inevitably drained their digital balance. They were the architects of an invisible trap that felt like a playground. The back end of the website was a marvel of automation and lean engineering built by a dedicated team. Despite handling billions of dollars in volume, the company operated with a surprisingly small staff compared to legacy casinos. Algorithms handled the majority of the risk management and payout processes, reducing human error and massive overhead costs. They had built a money printing machine that required very little physical fuel to keep running. The borderless nature of cryptocurrency allowed Stake to tap into markets that were previously unreachable due to currency restrictions. From the streets of London to remote villages in South America, anyone with an internet connection could join the game. They were not just a casino, they were a global liquidity pool where the house always held the winning hand. The sun never set on the digital empire they created. Behind the friendly social chat and the sleek graphics, the math remained relentless and completely unforgiving for the players. The founders knew exactly how to balance the payout ratios to keep people coming back while securing massive corporate profits. They studied the psychology of the near miss, ensuring that losing felt like a close call rather than a total failure. This subtle manipulation was the core of their blueprint. Every click, every bet, and every chat message was recorded and analyzed by their sophisticated internal data engines. They could predict which users were likely to stop playing and offer them personalized bonuses to keep them on the site. This level of granular detail allowed them to optimize their marketing spend with surgical precision and efficiency. They were not just gambling moguls, they were highly skilled data scientists. Ed and Bijan did not hire casino veterans. They hired top-tier developers and gamers who understood the digital landscape. This unconventional workforce brought a fresh perspective to an industry that had become stagnant and predictable over the years. They built a culture of rapid iteration and constant improvement, releasing new features at a speed that left competitors in the dust. The machine was constantly evolving. By the end of 2018, the blueprint was complete, and the foundations of the empire were practically unshakable. Stake had become the go-to destination for the crypto-rich and the digitally curious alike from every continent. The two nerds from Melbourne had successfully hacked the global gambling system, turning a niche hobby into a dominant force. They were finally ready to take their project into the global spotlight. The small digital fortress Ed and Bijan built was no longer a secret kept by the crypto elite. They realized that to reach the next level of global dominance, they needed to buy their way into the living rooms of every sports fan. With a war chest filled with billions in profit, they launched a marketing offensive that would dwarf the budgets of established corporate giants. The world was about to meet Stake. In a move that stunned both the music and gambling industries, Stake announced a massive partnership with the global superstar Drake. This was not a simple endorsement deal. It was a total cultural integration of the brand into the rapper's lifestyle. Drake began broadcasting live gambling sessions to millions of followers, placing bets of staggering sizes that seemed like play money. The Drake effect had officially begun to take hold. Watching a multimillionaire lose or win hundreds of thousands of dollars in a single click became the ultimate digital entertainment. The streams were filled with high energy, luxury backdrops, and the constant sound of digital coins clinking on the platform. To the young audience watching on Twitch and Instagram, Stake was no longer just a casino. It was a ticket to the world of the elite. Gambling had become undeniably cool. Beyond the world of celebrity influencers, the founders turned their sights toward the most prestigious arenas of global sport. They plastered their logo across the chassis of Formula One cars and the jerseys of English Premier League football clubs. These sponsorships provided a veneer of legitimacy that traditional crypto businesses often lacked in the eyes of the public. They were buying a seat at the table with the world's most iconic brands. The UFC became another key battleground for the Stake branding blitz, targeting a demographic that thrived on adrenaline and high-stakes competition. By partnering with the world's leading mixed martial arts organization, they embedded themselves into the very fabric of combat sports culture. Fans watching at home saw the Stake name every time a fighter entered the octagon. The visibility was absolute, inescapable, and incredibly expensive for the young founders to maintain. Estimates suggest that Stake's marketing budget exceeded hundreds of millions of dollars annually during this period of explosive global growth. This was a calculated risk by Ed and Bijan, who understood that in the attention economy, visibility is the ultimate currency. They were willing to burn massive amounts of cash to ensure that their platform was the first name mentioned whenever anyone thought about online betting. The blitz was working. However, as the Stake logo appeared on television screens from London to Sydney, the authorities finally began to wake up. Regulators in various countries started asking difficult questions about how a platform with such massive influence could operate without traditional licenses. The very fame they had purchased was now acting as a beacon for the taxman and the legal system. The shadows they once inhabited were quickly disappearing under the spotlight. Much of Stake's success was built on navigating the gray markets, where gambling laws were either non-existent or poorly enforced. They operated under a Curacao license, which allowed them to accept players from a vast array of international jurisdictions with minimal oversight. This flexibility was the engine of their growth, but it was also a massive target for critics concerned about money laundering. The tension between profit and legality was rising fast. The first major blow came when Twitch, the world's largest streaming platform, announced a ban on unlicensed gambling sites after immense public pressure. This move directly targeted the core of Stake's marketing strategy, threatening to cut off their direct line to the youth market. It was a moment of crisis for Ed and Bijan, who had built their empire on the backs of digital influencers. They had to adapt or face a slow decline. Instead of retreating, the founders doubled down on their vision of a digital ecosystem by funding the creation of a new platform. Hick.com was launched as a direct competitor to Twitch, offering massive contracts to creators who were banned from streaming gambling content elsewhere. This was a bold act of defiance against the tech establishment, proving that the Stake architects would not be silenced easily. They were now building their own playground. By the peak of the global blitz, Ed and Bijan had transformed from nerdy developers into polarizing figures of global power. They were the masters of a $23 billion machine that seemed to defy the gravity of the traditional financial world. But as the heat from regulators intensified and the public debate grew louder, the stakes had never been higher. The climax of their journey was approaching a dangerous, unpredictable point. As the sun sets over the Melbourne skyline, the shadow of Ed Craven's $80 million estate stretches long and deep across the neighborhood. Behind the glittering success and the $23 billion valuation, a storm of legal and ethical questions is gathering force. The world's biggest cryptocurrency casino is no longer just a business. It is a target for every major regulatory body in the Western world. The foundation of Stake's global operations rests on a tiny Caribbean island called Curaçao, a place famous for its flexible gambling laws. This specific license allowed Ed and Bijan to operate in a legal gray zone for years, reaching markets that traditional casinos could never touch. However, the lack of transparency in this jurisdiction has invited intense scrutiny from international anti-money laundering organizations and concerned governments. In their home country of Australia, the authorities began to investigate the flow of funds behind the company's massive real estate acquisitions. The Australian Transaction Reports and Analysis Centre, known as AUSTRAC, started looking into the potential risks associated with anonymous cryptocurrency gambling. The founders found themselves in a strange paradox. They were national icons of wealth, yet their business was viewed with deep suspicion. Beyond the legal battles, a more human controversy began to emerge regarding the social impact of the platform's addictive design. Critics argued that the seamless integration of social media, celebrity endorsements, and gambling was creating a new generation of addicts. The gamification of financial risk had turned a serious adult activity into a dangerous playground for vulnerable young people with digital wallets and high-speed internet. Ed Craven remained defiant in the face of these accusations, arguing that they were simply providing a modern service for a digital generation. He maintained that Stake was more transparent than any traditional casino because of its blockchain-based provably fair algorithms. In his view, the house was not the enemy, but a provider of entertainment in an increasingly decentralized and automated global economy. To survive the growing pressure, the architects of Stake began a strategic pivot toward more regulated and traditional gambling markets. They launched Stake Us, a social casino designed to navigate the complex and restrictive legal landscape of the United States. This move showed their ability to adapt and evolve, proving that they were always thinking 3 steps ahead of the politicians and the legacy competitors. Despite their efforts to legitimize the brand, the specter of the gray market continues to haunt the company's long-term corporate reputation. Many traditional financial institutions still refuse to work with businesses that rely heavily on